Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tank. My name is Alan. In the Ahsoka TV series, when we're introduced to Sabine Wren, we perceive her as a novice, an inexperienced young fighter who has just begun her path to becoming a seasoned warrior. She's portrayed in the same way we're introduced to many Star Wars protagonists, like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Jar Jar Binks, or even Ahsoka Tano, Sabine's master. Furthermore, Sabine's lack of force sensitivity and that home invasion that leads to her getting stabbed in the gut, Lothal just isn't what it used to be, serves a narrative that the Ahsoka series is trying to tell very well. Sabine will need her own character arc, and in order for that to happen, she needs to start off at the bottom, again. See, the reality is Sabine Wren is no wet behind the ears moisture farmer. She's a bona fide badass. She was a weapons designer, a former bounty hunter, a freedom fighter who played a huge role in liberating the planet of Lothal from the Empire and also liberating her own people. Did I mention also that she's a Mandalorian? Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about all of the life experience and cultural aspects of her background that makes her very well suited for being Ahsoka's apprentice, and specifically for taking on Force sensitives. But before we continue, in celebration of the release of the Ahsoka series, our sponsor for today's video, ownersaber.com, has a really awesome deal. And it ends on September 17th, so mark that on your calendar. If you purchase one of their replica sabers, you get a Padawan saber for free. Owner Saber's replica category features some truly unique and beautiful looking blades. The hottest thing right now to get is the Samurai, modeled after the pair of blades Ahsoka Tano uses in the series. She actually built this piece by piece from scraps she collected while in hiding after Order 66. Also in the replica category, you have Ezra Bridger's lightsaber and Kanan Jarrus' lightsaber. They even have the Inquisitor's double-edged design as well, and many other cool hilts. To take advantage of this deal, simply add a replica saber and a Padawan saber of your choice in the cart, and the discount will automatically be applied at checkout. For more information, look at the description down below, and don't forget to use our promo code EWOK, that's all caps, for an additional $15 off. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. Now, guys, you know what non-Force sensitive faction has killed more Force sensitives than almost anyone? It's the Mandalorians. Well, really, it's also the clones probably during Order 66, but even then the clones' DNA and culture are connected through Jango Fett and his Cool Valdar, which is still pretty Mandalorian. And so if Ahsoka's goal is to find an apprentice that can help her defeat a pair of dark side mercenaries, I think Sabine Wren's Mandalorian background makes her really well suited for this job. You see, Mandalorians are not actually a race. They're not united by their genetics, but their beliefs and worship of a set of ideals. Those ideals make them really good at killing things. Yes, in the Clone Wars, they are depicted as Scandinavian-like, with half of their population living like brutal Viking warriors from the Age of Steel and Fire, and the other half of their population living in a modern Nordic model society with high living standards and a high happiness index. But dig a bit into the Mandalorians' past and you'll find out that this is really an ethno-linguistic group. Kind of like the Jews. Sorry, Jews, that people keep using you as examples, but they really are a good example. Despite the Jewish population having some shared genetic traits, they do come from almost every corner of the world. You have Ashkenazi Jews hailing originally from Western Germany and France. They would eventually shift more to Central and Eastern Europe. You have Sephardic Jews expelled from Spain and Portugal during the Inquisition to parts of Europe and the Middle East. You have the Mizrahi Jews, or Oriental Jews. They were spread all throughout the Middle East and North Africa. You also have smaller groups like the Beta Israel community or Ethiopian Jews. There are more than 160,000 of them living in Israel right now. Then there are at least 5 separate Jewish communities that can trace their roots to India. There is also a tiny Kaifeng Jewish community in China as well, which is kind of wild when I found this out, to be honest. And the modern Jewish community, of course, becomes even more and more diverse with each generation. Now, a lot of anti-Semites might claim that the Jews are a race, but they misunderstand that this group of people are united by their linguistic, religious, and cultural history. And the Mandalorians can also be identified as such, an ethno-linguistic group. In Legends, their origins were on the world of Notron, which is what Coruscant used to be called. At the time, the Mandalorians were actually a part of the Twang race. These were predator-like aliens who warred against the 13 tribes of Zel, who were basically proto-humans. The Twang lost this battle against the Zel and were forced to flee the center of the galaxy for the world that would eventually be called Mandalore. Within a few generations, the Twang's warrior society had attracted an increasingly large number of humans and other aliens who wanted to pledge themselves to their way of life. So as you can see, the Mandalorians are not just a race. They're actually united by their culture, their religion, and also their linguistics. Even though Sabine Wren was always seen as an outsider and nonconformist, take a closer look at her actions, from developing the arc pulse generator to her rebelling against her culture by becoming a bounty hunter. Lol. She's a Mandalorian through and through, and a big part of her culture was built on the battlefield.
I'm a Mandalorian. Weapons are part of my religion. I'm a Mandalorian. Weapons are part of my religion.
The Mandalorians of old would go on these great crusades and crush all opposition before them. Occasionally, the Mandalorians would run into warrior groups like the Onderonians and Basilisks, who would prove to be a huge challenge for them. And so the Mandalorians would bestow onto these groups the great honor of learning their tradition and culture and then using it against them. They're great innovators when it came to war. And when the Mandalorians ran into the Jedi, it was a meeting of two great warrior cultures, and for the first time in their history, the Mandalorians were completely shook. The Jedi, with their magical powers, their command over the Force, seemed unstoppable. But the Mandalorians were not deterred. They retreated a little bit, and they started innovating. They would begin to attach jetpacks onto the back of their armor. This gave them the ability to keep their distance from the melee-focused Jedi, who could essentially fly through the air in great leaps. The second a Jedi gets within lightsaber swing range, usually Mandalorian dies. The Mandalorians would also add missiles to their jetpacks and extra blasters to their wrists, rockets to their knees. You see, explosions and rapid firing are a great way to penetrate a Jedi's defense. Then you had things like flamethrowers, which were almost impossible to block with a lightsaber, bolas that could surprise a Jedi and create some hesitation. You also had darts and slug throwers, which couldn't be stopped exactly by a saber. And of course, on top of all that, their Beskar armor was impervious to lightsaber strikes. The only weakness was in their joints. If you take a close look at Mandalorian history, there's a lot of things pointing to the fact that after the Mandalorians met the Jedi, they went completely over the top with designing their armor and bolting a ton of defensive and offensive measures onto them. And by the way, the Jedi have done some pretty vicious things to the Mandalorians. Although it could also be argued that the Sith are really the Mandalorians' greatest enemies. In both the Great Sith War and the Mandalorian Wars, the Sith had taken advantage of the Mandalorians' bloodlust and used them to stir up chaos in the galaxy, which is what ultimately led to the Mandalorians' downfall on multiple occasions. The point is, the Mandalorians have mastered the art of fighting Force sensitives while not being Force sensitives themselves, and they had a really good reason to do this. This is why Sabine Wren doesn't even hesitate a little bit when confronting the dark side Force sensitive Shin Hati when she shows up at her house with a lightsaber. Even though Sabine Wren has barely even mastered Form 1 of lightsaber combat, she has the courage to stand and fight. And I would argue that her biggest flaw in this battle is not her lack of lightsaber skills. It's actually because she forgot her biggest advantage as a Mandalorian, her armor and gear. I mean, you gotta AT-GATs, or all the gear all the time when you're a Mandalorian. I mean, why do you think Din Djarin can't remove his helmet? It's because the Mandalorians that survived the Purge were extremely paranoid and wanted to be prepared for conflict even when they're chilling at home. I mean, the Children of the Watch are the same as those dudes who just sit in their couch with a shotgun in hand waiting for someone to rob their house. They're not even like listening to a podcast or watching TV, they're just watching the door. And so I think the entire fight with Shin Hati would have gone completely different had Sabine Wren been wearing her Beskar armor and had her full range of gadgets and weapons and defensive measures. As a matter of fact, we rarely ever see Mandalorians outside of the new Mandalorian faction in combat without their precious Beskar. And Sabine Wren has a really cool suit of armor that I think is uniquely well suited for lightsaber or melee combat. First of all, her armor, as you can all tell, is painted in very distracting patterns. This actually helps hide where her armor plates end and where her insulation suit starts. But this is really her just rebelling against the more standard Death Watch blue that Clan Wren was forced to wear during her teenage years. Yes, Sabine Wren is an artist, and by coloring her suit of armor into a very colorful pattern, it does make her more visible. But then again, if you're fighting a Force sensitive, they don't just use their eyes to find things. They can feel people through the Force. So that pattern doesn't really matter. However, the patterns do hide something very unique about Sabine's armor, and that is just how little coverage it has compared to someone like Din Djarin, who I would say is wearing heavy Beskar, or Paz Vizsla, who is wearing super heavy Beskar. I would actually classify Sabine Wren's armor as super light. It has minimal torso armor, shoulder and arm armor, and almost no thigh armor at all. She kind of reminds me of one of those wide receivers who think they're too cool for tailbone, hip, and thigh pads, you know, the type of wide receiver that takes the run plays off and doesn't block downfield. Now, this would be a problem for Sabine Wren if she fought like other Mandalorians, but she really doesn't. Since the Galactic Civil War, she's been training in melee combat, specifically to wield the Darksaber in an effort to unite the Mandalorian people and ally them with the Rebellion. Her suit of armor with those quarterback shoulder pads and just lack of lower protection means that she has full mobility, which is really important when you're fighting someone hand-to-hand or with a melee weapon. Look at this duel between her and Gar Saxon, for instance. He's wearing on his upper body a big, chunky Imperial Super Commando chest piece, which is made out of one large plate of Beskar and completely restricts his movement. Whatever mobility he has is given to him by his jetpack, and once he loses that, Sabine is able to close in and destroy him. Also, in the cartoon version of Sabine Wren's armor, the chest piece is even smaller, giving her more mobility, and ultimately, that leads to her victory here. I mean, even Sabine Wren's jetpack is super slimmed down and doesn't have a missile on it, which really fits her combat style. And that's just how her armor physically looks and is shaped. Let's also talk about all the gadgets she has on her armor. Mandalorians love to accessorize, and I don't mean like boring stuff like Louis Vuitton handbags or, I don't know, like Tiffany necklaces. Instead, Sabine has a state-of-the-art Mando helmet made out of Beskar, which, like the rest of her armor, is impervious from lightsaber attacks. And inside that helmet, she has a targeting system that links directly to a pair of Star 35 blaster pistols that she likes to wear. This is a classic Death Watch piece, by the way, both elegant and deadly in design. This targeting system is also why Mandos like Sabine can get away with not aiming down the sights and dual wielding. I mean, just imagine Sabine fighting with a lightsaber in one hand and a blaster in another. I've always said that would be the optimal way to really fight a lightsaber fight. You know, lock up your enemy and then... Now, most of her extra firepower comes in the form of a variety of detonators and paint bombs she would keep on her belt or in her satchel. She would also occasionally use detonator tape. Then we have one of her coolest pieces of kit, a gift from Fen Rah, one of the last Mandalorian protectors.
I brought you something, since you're partially in this mess on my recommendation.
I'm sorry, partially? How about completely?
To make up for that, you can have these.
Whoa.
He pledged an oath to her and would mentor her during her training with the Darksaber.
Mandalorian van braces? Where did you get these?
Try them on.
I love how Fen Rah just skips over where he got this from, you know, like who he murdered to get these awesome van braces.
Grappling line, paralyzing darts, repulsor, all designed to combat the abilities of the Jedi. Go take Bridget down a peg or two.
Like I said, Mandalorians are obsessed with killing Jedi, even the Jedi on your side. And as you can see, these little tricks like the light whip or the little shield projector she has on her wrist should balance the playing field quite a lot. And if Ahsoka manages to train Sabine Wren properly on how to tap into the Force and get into rhythm with her blade, she might become one of the most interesting and unorthodox duelists we've seen in Star Wars, and she'll probably be one of the best non-Force sensitive lightsaber wielders. So yeah, she won't be a traditional Jedi with perfect form who can utilize the Force and precognition with great power and precision. But when you have a flamethrower on your wrist, do you really need precision at all? I mean, I know a lot of people aren't really comfortable with Sabine Wren being, you know, like the new apprentice for Ahsoka. Some don't like her purple hair or the fact that she's a girl. But guys, we're about to see the Jedi and the Mandalorians, two of the most badass warrior groups in Star Wars, come together in live action. Are you serious?